All right, you guys, this is 8.2.2, the quadratic formula. This is going to be our last method, our third and last method of solving a quadratic equation. So we have covered solving by square roots, which we can do if we complete the square. And then we learned how to use the zero product property by factoring. And that's what we were practicing the last couple of days. Now, if you did the practice yesterday, you should have realized that sometimes you can't use factoring as a method because things don't always factor. So some of these methods have limitations, and we've already talked about how sometimes it's not a good equation to use certain methods. So this is the last method, and it's the method that works all the time, no matter what. And it's not really affected by whether the numbers are good or not. It's called the quadratic formula. So I'm not going to show it because I don't want to take the time right now, but I probably will at some point show where this comes from. So this is about if we have an equation of this form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, what x ends up being if we were to solve it. Now you might say, how do we solve? It's got a, b, and c. How could we solve that? Well, we could do all the steps that we would do to solve, and that will lead us to this formula. So this formula comes from if we were to solve for x in this equation by completing the square and then just like doing things with the variables and rearranging until we got x by itself, which is pretty cool to see. So we'll probably get it at some point. But for now, you just need to know the formula. When I learned this, learned a pretty cheesy little story for remembering the quadratic formula. There are songs, but I'm not a singer, so I will not sing you a song about the quadratic formula, but basically you need to remember it. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you the story that I learned, and I get to do it over video, so I don't have to feel awkward because it is very lame. I'm going to do it anyway because I remember it still. So this is for x, when we solve a quadratic, x equals, and here's the story. So once upon a time, there was a negative boy who couldn't decide whether to go to a radical party or stay home and be a square and miss out on 4 awesome chicks. And so he goes to the party and he parties all night until the party is over, at 2 a.m. And that's the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I'll tell the story again. I know it's lame. There once was a negative boy who couldn't decide whether to go to a radical party or stay home and be a square and miss out on 4 awesome chicks. And the party's all over at 2 a.m. Ta-da. There's the story. So whatever it takes for you to remember it, you want to know this equation by heart because it's super useful because it means we can solve any quadratic equation no matter what, and we really don't have to do any real thinking. We're just using a formula. Now, there's still going to be issues to simplify and all that, so that's what we're going to go over in the example. So let's go ahead and get started. So we have an equation here. It's quadratic. And we're going to use the formula to do that. So the first step is to get 0 on one side. So I'm going to do that in the fastest way, which would be to subtract 2x squared. Doesn't matter. You might feel more comfortable moving things over to the left side, but it really doesn't matter. So I'm just doing it whatever takes the fewest steps. And then I'm at the same time rearranging all my terms so that it goes ax squared plus bx plus c. Now we want to identify the things we need for the formula. So this is a formula for the use of numbers. We don't put any variables into this. So our a is just the number that's in front of x, and that's negative 2, x squared, sorry. Our b is the number in front of x, and our c was the number at the end, the constant, and that's 5. So we've got a is negative 2, b is negative 8, and c is 5. So now I can use my formula. All right. Now, we are going to all do what I ask you here, which is we're going to write out the formula. Every time we solve using the formula, what I want you to do is write out the whole formula first before plugging in the numbers. So what I mean by that is we're going to go negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. The reason I want you to write it all out like that first and then fill in the a, b, and c is because this way you might you'll avoid making mistakes. So notice the formula has a negative on it, but we're going to put in a negative b, and it's really easy to do that incorrectly, to forget that the formula is negative and b is negative, and that's going to lead to a positive. So I'd like you to always write out the formula first like I've done, and then go ahead and start plugging. So b is negative 8. Gets plugged in two places. A is negative 2 and C is 5. And that's the formula. So I technically, if I have X, but I have a lot of simplifying to do. So we know our solution is this. We just need to simplify it down, and we're going to be really careful about that. So we have a negative becoming a positive 8. We have exponents to do in here, so that's 64. Negative 8 squared is 64. And I have one negative, another negative, and a positive. So I have two numbers that are negative and one positive, so I know those will multiply to make a plus. I always figure out my sign first, and then I just multiply all three numbers. So two negatives are going to make a positive, and 4 times 2 times 5 is going to be 40. Okay, so I'm just doing a couple of things at a time. There's going to be several steps of the quadratic formula, so it can be tedious, even though you really aren't solving, you're just working out numbers. So just be really careful. Okay, so then I add what's under my square root, 104. Okay, so we're very close to having an answer here, but this answer isn't simplified. So what I want to discuss now is what can you do to this and what can you not do. So starting with what can you not do. You may think I can divide 8 by negative 4 and just make that negative 2, but you cannot do that because we have to divide everything. It's all over negative 4, so we would have to divide both things by negative 4 at the same time if we wanted to divide, and we can't do that because we can't divide a square root by a number. We have to simplify the square root and get something outside first. So at this point, we don't want to do anything with this, but we do want to simplify 104 as a square root. So that simplifies to 4 and 26 and 2 and 2. So if you spend a little time on that, you'll break it down to 2 square root of 104 over negative 4. Okay, and this is going to be our answer almost. Now that I've pulled something out of here, what I can do is reduce, but what you can't do is just divide one of the things. So you have to reduce both terms. See, there's two things in the numerator. So there's this, and we have to reduce them both the same amount. So there's two options for what you could do. I typically leave it all as one fraction, and I just reduce all of these by what they all can reduce by, which is 2. So I'm going to change this to 4 plus or minus the square root of 104 over negative 2. So what I did there, see, was I reduced them both by 2, and then that's going to be my final answer. So that's option number 1. Or what you could do from that step is you could separate into two fractions. And so then you could divide the 8 fully by 4 and then leave the square root, and then reduce the square root fraction as well, just by 2. So that would be your other option. Either one is fine. I'm going to go with this one. I like to just leave it as one fraction if possible, but either answer would be correct and fully simplified. Oh, sorry, not that one. Oh, sorry, I made some mistakes all the way down here. I forgot to change this 104 to a 26. Sorry. Okay, so that's 2 square root of 26 if we simplify it. Hopefully that didn't hang you up too much. Okay, anyway, so this is my answer. I'm going to just go back to the one I boxed originally. And I want to talk today also about different ways we can express our answer. So on your homework today, I want to be able to leave our answer in an exact form, or calculate it out as a decimal. So I'm going to show. We're going to do that right now as well. So this is 4 plus or minus the square root of x. So on your square root of 28 over -2. On your homework, you're going to be asked for two answers, the exact answer, and there are two. So I'm going to separate this into the two answers that it really is. Okay, so I have 4 plus and minus square root of 26 over -2. That's my exact answer. And then underneath, you're going to be asked for the approximated answer that you'll get from a calculator. So this is where I want to start actually calculating this out so that you can start seeing what the numbers actually are. Because when we get into some word problems, we are going to want to do that. So I'm going to go into Desmos. I'm just in the graphing calculator, but you can go into the scientific calculator. And I'm going to use that calculator to work this out. So 4 plus the square root of 26 all over, what was it, -2? And so I get -4.55 as one of my answers. And then I have 4 minus the square root of 26 all over -2. So my two answers would be -4.55 and 0.55. -4.55 and 0.55. Okay, so that you can see that this is an answer that just is a number with that is a decimal. Okay, so that's our first example. Let's go ahead and do another one. Why don't you pause and attempt to use the quadratic formula and then unpause and see how your work matches up with mine. Okay, so my A here, it's already equal to 0, so I'm going to go ahead and just identify my A, my B, and my C. So I don't know if this threw you off, but the B here is going to be -1 because we have an X term, so it's not going to be 0, but there is a number, there's no number in front of it, so it's a 1. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use my formula. X equals, and like I told you, we're going to write it all out first. Okay, so my B, -1, my A, 6, and my C, -12. So -1 becomes +1. 1 squared is 1. I have two negatives again, which is going to make a plus. And what is 4 times 6 times 12? 288. And 12 on the bottom. And so now we have 1 plus or minus the square root of 289 over 12. And the square root of 289 is 17. That's actually a perfect square. So the square root of 289 is 17. Exactly. So we get to a place now where we don't have the square root anymore. And you might be tempted to stop here. But again, this is two answers. And because we don't have a square root anymore, we can keep going with calculating our answer. So this is where we would split in two. So we have 1 plus 17 divided by 12. And 1 minus 17 divided by 12. So we've got 18 over 12 and -16 over 12. And that's going to be 3 over 2 and -4 over 3. So x is 3 over 2 and -4 over 3. So we only have exact answers here. There would be no need to calculate this as a decimal. Okay, so you have an example in example 1 of a problem where we ended up with irrational answers, and we talked about how to simplify that and then express as a decimal. And then we have an example in example 2 where we actually have a rational answer. Just a quick note, if we get an answer like this where we don't have our square root anymore, what it means for our original problem is this was factorable. So us getting rational answer at the end should tell you that this was actually a factorable problem. So eventually you're going to have the choice of like, how do you solve? It turns out we could have solved by factoring. And I believe it would have been like this if we had factored. And we would have gotten to the same answer. So factoring would have been my preferred method here. I'm always going to choose a method that's not quadratic formula. I typically only use quadratic formula if I have to, but I want you to practice quadratic formula for today. All right, so that's quadratic formula. You have a worksheet tonight, and see you later, Monday hopefully.